Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Barack Obama announced Friday plans to pull U.S. combat forces out of Iraq by August 2010. Obama broke the news at Camp Lejeune, a Marine Corps base in North Carolina.
As a candidate for president, I made clear my support for a timeline of 16 months to carry out this drawdown, while pledging to consult closely with our military commanders upon taking office to ensure that we preserve the gains we've made and to protect our troops. These consultations are now complete, and I've chosen a timeline that will remove our combat brigades over the next 18 months.
Under President Obama's plan, up to 50,000 troops will remain in Iraq through 2011.
As I have long said, we will retain a transitional force to carry out three distinct functions: training, equipping, and advising Iraqi security forces as long as they remain non-sectarian, conducting targeted counterterrorism missions, and protecting our ongoing civilian and military efforts within Iraq. Initially, this force will likely be made up of 35,000 to 50,000 U.S. troops.
President Obama's decision to keep 50,000 troops in Iraq has angered many critics of the war. Iraq Veterans Against the War described Obama's proposal as a, quote, plan for almost 3 more years of an unjustified military occupation. During an interview on MSNBC, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi spoke out against part of Obama's plan.
I don't know what the justification is for 50,000, a presence of 50,000 troops in Iraq. I do think that there's a need for some, and I don't know that all of them have to be in country. I would think a third of that, maybe 20,000, a little more than a third, 15 or 20,000.
President Obama's speech on Iraq left several major questions unanswered. He did not address whether the U.S. will keep permanent military bases in Iraq, and he made no promise to withdraw the over 100,000 private U.S. military contractors and mercenaries stationed in Iraq. The Obama administration's agreed to give the insurance giant AIG an additional $30 billion as part of a revamped government bailout. This comes on top of the $150 billion in taxpayer money already doled out to the firm. The New York Times reports federal officials felt they had no choice but to prop up AIG because of its business and trading activities so intricately woven through the world's banking system. AIG is expected to report today a record $62 billion loss, the biggest quarterly loss in corporate history. The $30 billion bailout of AIG comes 3 days after the firm sued the U.S. government over a disputed $300 million tax bill. In other economic news, more signs have emerged that the financial crisis is worsening. The Commerce Department's announced gross domestic product shrank at a 6.2% annual pace from October through December, the most since 1982. The Census Bureau is reporting the median price of new homes fell by a staggering 10% between December and January. The FDIC says 250 banks are now on the agency's list of banks that could fail. 16 banks have already failed this year, compared with 25 in all of 2008. In California, the unemployment rate is top 10% for the first time in a quarter of a century. In Afghanistan, President Hamid Karzai is coming under intense criticism from opponents for trying to hold the Afghan presidential election next month, 4 months earlier than an election date set by the country's Independent Election Commission. Karzai's move is seen as an attempt to guarantee his re-election. One presidential candidate, the former finance minister, Ashraf Ghani, said, quote, a very dangerous first step has been taken that, if it's not checked, could lead us to the very unfortunate situation of Kenya or Zimbabwe. This is a very perilous position we have to avoid. UN officials said it would be impossible even to have paper ballots in time for an election for next month. Meanwhile, the former top U.S. commander in Afghanistan has projected that U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan for another 16 years. Retired Lieutenant General David Barno told a Senate panel last week it'll take until 2025 for the U.S. to fully hand over control to Afghan institutions. The CIA is continuing to carry out missile strikes in Pakistan. At least 8 people died on Sunday. when an unmanned drone attacked a compound in northwest Pakistan near the border with Afghanistan. U.S. officials said the target was a Taliban sanctuary. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's arrived in Egypt in her first trip to the Middle East since taking office. Clinton's attending an international conference in Sharm el-Sheikh to raise money for the Gaza Strip. The U.S. plans to pledge $300 million in humanitarian relief for the people of Gaza, in addition to $600 million for the Palestinian Authority. The additional money not aimed at Gaza comprises $200 million in budget support to pay wages, much of which was previously announced, and $400 million to support reform and development in the West Bank. Secretary of State Clinton praised the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank.
Through his commitment to negotiations with neighbors, President Abbas has shown the hallmarks of leadership, as has Prime Minister Fayyad, who has bolstered the credibility of his government by instituting a national budget process that is transparent and serves the needs of the Palestinian people. They are offering their people the option of a peaceful, independent, and more prosperous future, not the violence and false choices of extremists whose tactics, including rocket attacks that continue to this day, only will lead to more hardship and suffering. These attacks must stop.
The Washington Post reports the U.S. aid package underscores how little the Obama administration's policy toward the Palestinian issue has thus far differed from the Bush administration's approach. International aid groups are calling on Israel to lift Israel's blockade of Gaza because they say it's preventing the Palestinians from rebuilding the Gaza Strip. Israel's banned the importation of cement, steel rods, and other material necessary for construction. Over the past month, Israel's also arbitrarily refused to allow entry to items like chickpeas, macaroni, wheat flour, notebooks for students, freezer appliances, generators, and water pumps, as well as cooking gas. Meanwhile, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports Israeli government agency is quietly promoting plans to vastly expand a settlement in the occupied West Bank that currently houses just 12 Israeli families. The Israeli civil administration's proposed the initial construction of 550 apartments in the settlement of Gvaot, located near Alon Shvut, followed by the construction of another 4,450 units at a later stage. Another 2,000 apartments are planned for a neighboring settlement. The Obama administration's announced that the United States will boycott the World Conference Against Racism in Geneva next month unless its final document drops all references to Israel and reparations for slavery. Israel and Canada have already announced plans to boycott the UN conference. In 2001, Bush administration diplomats walked out of the conference in Durban, South Africa, after delegates proposed a resolution likening Zionism to racism. AIPAC, the American Public Affairs Committee, praised President Obama's decision. The group said, quote, the event, which has again proven to be a celebration of racism and vile anti-Semitic activity, is further evidence of the UN's inability to demonstrate any semblance of fairness or objectivity on these issues when it comes to the Jewish state, unquote. The chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, declared Sunday the U.S. now believes Iran's amassed enough uranium that with further purification could be used to build an atomic bomb. Mullen's statement on CNN went further than previous official judgments of the Iranian nuclear threat. But in a separate interview, Defense Secretary Robert Gates downplayed the immediate threat posed by Iran. During an interview on Meet the Press, Gates said, quote, they're not close to a stockpile, they're not close to a weapon at this point, so there's some time. In other news on Iran, the Iranian government has admitted it's been holding an American journalist in jail since late January. 31-year-old Roxana Saberi is a freelance reporter for the BBC, National Public Radio, and Fox News. Iran accused her of gathering news illegally. In news from Africa, the president of the West African nation of Guinea-Bissau has been assassinated in the presidential palace by a group of renegade soldiers. The killing of João Bernardo Vieira came one day after the nation's armed forces chief of staff was shot dead. The two men were considered staunch political rivals. In Haiti, several thousand people staged a protest Saturday to mark the 5th anniversary of the U.S.-backed coup that led to the ouster of Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. The protest came days after the Haitian government barred members of Aristide's Lavalas party from running in the upcoming Senate elections.
We are here so the rights of the majority of the population will be respected. The people cannot eat, they only have battery acid to live on. Also, there can be no elections without the participation of the Lavalas party. And 5 years after the kidnapping of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the people's dream is to ask for his return.
A federal appeals court in San Francisco has rejected an argument by the Obama administration that the court should stop a lawsuit challenging the government's warrantless wiretapping program because a trial would potentially threaten national security. The ruling came in a case involving a defunct Islamic charity. Government lawyers signaled they would continue fighting to keep the information secret, setting up a new showdown between the courts and the White House over national security.